So now we will move to the panel. And we're going to start with the ticketing panel. There is a lot going on at the state level. Very often, the state level gets overlooked, but there's a phenomenal amount of legislation brought by our friends at StubHub mostly at the state level, which is of great concern, and our panelists today have some firsthand experience with that. So why don't we start with Kevin, and why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and what your organization does.
Sure. I'm Kevin Erickson with Future of Music Coalition. We've been around over 20 years now, making sure that musicians have a voice in the various policy and advocacy issues that impact their lives and their livelihoods. And lately especially, we've been focusing on creating the kind of open and collaborative relationships with the full array of industry partners and stakeholders, as well as folks working in adjacent industries that have some impact on musicians, as well as consumer advocates, labor folks, media reformers, and just making sure that we've got a seat at the table in all of those conversations, and trying to be the connective tissue between different kinds of conversations and get people working together productively so we can advance some clear common goals. Ticketing is an example of a conversation where the artist voice in these things has been left out for too long because, in part as a result of the Live Nation merger, the Live Nation Ticketmaster merger that happened in 2009, 2010, the debate around these issues has been sort of framed by this behemoth monopolist on one side and the resellers, StubHub, Vivid Seats, SeatGeek, and the army of brokers that list their tickets on those sites on the other side, right? And the perspective of not just artists, but also independent venues, the workers, the small businesses that are actually at stake have been sort of left out of those debates, right? And, what is happening right now is about correcting that, is about recentering the debate on the experience of working people. And it's not just the ticketing issue. The ticketing issue is like a microcosm of the thing that has to happen across the entire economy, where all of these policy debates have to be recentered on the experience of workers and small businesses, right? To be able to get to and that's ultimately, in our view, the way that you get to good policies is that work for consumers and ordinary citizens as well. Like ultimately, if you get the analysis right for musicians and small businesses, the outcomes are going to be good for consumers as well, right? And so, both at the federal level and in many of these state debates, we found that there's a lot of curiosity about what artists are experiencing in this ecosystem. But we're up against 15 years of misinformation coming mostly from the broker's side, right? So we have to be pretty aggressive in getting in there and getting our ideas out there. Things are trending the right direction now.
Right, so Stephen, you want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing, and please include in that something about the Save Our Stages bill, which meant a lot to us in Austin.
Sure. I wasn't on the prep call, so we'll see if I'm invited back after the things that I say today. But first, I'll just say, Linda Blausbaum, you know that you have a special program at AU when you've convinced someone really special to leave what I viewed was one of the best jobs in DC. I don't know if you know how lucky you are to have Linda, but in my short time in this industry, she's been extraordinarily helpful to me and NEVA, and I'm grateful that she invited me here and invited NEVA to speak. NEVA is the trade association that represents promoters, venues, and performing arts centers, university presenters, everybody that puts on music, comedy, and performance in the country in every community. Our members are more than 1,400, and they're in 600 communities across the country. We were formed in the midst of the pandemic because we were all closed, and we were not going to be able to reopen. And folks like Audrey Fick-Schaefer, who's over there, who is the head of communications at the 930 Club, and a whole bunch of others across the country, ultimately led the effort to pass Save Our Stages, which was a bill that created a grant program that ultimately was called the Shutter Venue Operators Grant. It amounted to $16.25 billion, which is the largest arts investment in U.S. history, and probably will be that for a long time, unfortunately. Ticketing is the lifeblood of our industry. And Audrey actually moderated a panel in Nashville a few weeks ago, and the state legislator she had on there said something that really struck me, which is people like StubHub and Ticketmaster and Vivid Seats and the bad actors that continue to empower predatory resellers, they want us to think that this is normal. They want us to think that the struggles that artists have to go through and that venues have to go through is just the way it has to be. That's the industry. But all of you know, the folks on this stage know better than I do, touring is how artists make their money. That's how they survive. It's ultimately how they're able to share their gift with the world. And why should artists have to struggle? Why should venues have to struggle and worry about keeping their doors open when Michael Rapino, the CEO of Live Nation, has the largest gap between him and the lowest paid employee in the world at any company? Why should we have to struggle when StubHub and Vivid Seats aren't putting anything into the ecosystem and are making record profits? NEVA sent a letter to Congress last month, and we found about 9,000 tickets ahead of the Oasis on sale for the shows here in the US. What it turned into after we sent that letter was not a story about how artists are suffering or about how this is fraud and how consumer protection is needed. It turned into a slug match between StubHub, Vivid Seats, and Ticketmaster, and we became a footnote. The artists became a footnote. It was two companies taking swings at each other, trying to score points before their IPO is filed or to make sure that their stock price didn't go down. That's the trouble with ticketing, and I'm looking forward to discussing it today.
Right. Thank you. So Mala, tell us a little bit about your situation in Georgia Music Partners.
Sure. So my name is Mala Sharma. I head up Georgia Music Partners. We are an advocacy coalition that represents Georgia's music industry across the board. So not just live, but songwriters, publishers, and anyone in the industry. And it's about 90,000 Georgians that contribute about $5.6 billion in economic impact to the state of Georgia. And our focus has primarily been city, county, and state policy as it pertains to music. We do a combination of, some proactive, business-friendly policy work, but oftentimes we have to be reactive, which is a position I don't like us to be in. I think as an industry, that's hurt musicians, it's hurt our industry. The long game with Silicon Valley and the entertainment industry, they have invested, millions of dollars, and they're able to do so to kind of fight musicians. And so as the boots on the ground at the state level, I think we've been pretty effective in being able to be that voice for the industry. And we had the last probably 4 years, StubHub and their coalition have hired a team of lobbyists in Georgia to introduce policy that would would mandate that tickets that are resold are not sold through the platform that they were originally sold on. So it's basically taking away the artist's ability to dictate how their product is sold. That does not happen in any other industry. Can you imagine if you bought a car from Mercedes and then you were told that when you went to sell that car, you had to sell it through a certain, other company? You couldn't make that decision on your own. And the misinformation, and I think, what Stephen was referring to is, 15 plus years of of information. They have systematically, since I think about 2006, gone state by state to dismantle the scalping laws that were once, prevalent. And so we are, we're behind the 8 ball here and looking at ways to now advance policy to protect the artist, to protect the venues and the promoters that actually do invest, and it is their IP that's being damaged when, predatory brokerage companies come in and kind of, make their huge profit off the backs of those who are investing.
Thank you. So David, tell us a little about what you're doing, and then we'll talk about the Georgia bill.
Sure. I'm David Lowery. I got in this business because I started a band in 1983 called Camper Van Beethoven. Nobody wanted to put out our records, so we put them out ourselves, and we founded an indie label. I've since gone on to form another band called Cracker that has platinum records. Spent some time in the tech world as a kind of advisor and seed investor. That's because my degree was in mathematics, so everybody I knew that went to college went into Silicon Valley, and I went with my band. And then later had an idea for a dissertation, so I got a doctorate. I've been teaching at University of Georgia since 2011. Hence the SEC reference, that's what that was about. Like Chris said, started a blog, started advocating on artist rights, particularly in the belly of the beast in Silicon Valley, which was interesting because nobody was doing that at the time, and have since come around to running or starting the Symposium and the Artist Rights Institute and advocating on behalf of artists, right? Today we're going to talk about ticketing. I would like to keep everybody's squarely on the ball. I'm not really good at sports analogies, by the way, so even though I teach at an SEC university, keeping our eye on the ball, that the biggest problem in the ticketing space right now is the third-party resellers. I feel like I'm in the 8th season of a sitcom here with Silicon Valley and these certain collections of capital here. They're constantly, in the name, they're claiming that they're innovative companies, but really all they do is leverage the money they raise to change laws to make those laws favorable to their businesses. And if that that's not simply a threat to the music business, that's actually a threat to democracy, if you really want to talk about it. It's bizarre that we have laws that are going to mandate that I have to sell my tickets through a couple of companies, allow them for resale. It's just Orwellian to me. But anyway, we'll get to all of that, and I'm going to pass it back to Chris.
So, Mala, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Georgia bill? Because we're going to talk about state legislation predominantly here, particularly specific bills that the panelists were involved with, and in one case we're going to talk about this new model legislation that I just discovered yesterday, which means more fun yet to be had. That's being pushed by, I think, the StubHub cluster.
SeatGeek.
Yeah. So, Mala, tell us a little about the Georgia. There was a specific bill that came up in Georgia that had a lot of these bad attributes to it.
Yeah, and not just Georgia. So
Right. Yeah. Not just. We'll take that as an example.
It's come up in a number of states, and it's some variation of the same thing, and you see the same lobbyist teams from StubHub, Vivid, SeatGeek. They've got some AstroTurf companies that you guys may know. I can't remember the names. Is it Fans First? No.
Sports
That's
Fans
us.
Coalition.
Sports Fans Coalition. There's a couple of others. And so they, they really have focused on a couple of different things. They want to, as I mentioned before, in the Georgia law, which I think it was two pages of legislation, but in the fine print going back and forth, I think it ended up taking us about 8 hours to get through what it was really trying to do. Is one of the things was mandating that if there was a primary ticket seller, that the artist and the promoter had contracted to sell the tickets. When you go to resell those tickets, you are no longer allowed to do it on that platform, which, just makes zero sense except for their business model, which I think they're, about a 10 ticket, secondary ticketing companies are about $10 billion, or roughly that industry. So, when we talk about, Stephen was talking about, Live Nation and these secondary markets kind of battling it out. They're the big guns, but the independent venues and theaters and colleges that are putting on these shows, they're the ones that are investing in those shows. It's, they're renting the facilities or those, it's all, it has all worked kind of symbiotically. And now you've got someone coming in saying, well, if you're going to resell those tickets, you're going to have to do it through us, having not invested a dime in those events. And so we obviously had a problem with that portion of it. The other, issue that we had was just, as I think we all talked about, is the speculative ticketing issue, which is where the tickets are being sold before they have even gone public. They've gone on sale. And that's doing a tremendous disservice, obviously, to the fans. And most fans don't realize that that is not a ticket that the artist, the artist has not put that price on there. We've seen up to 100 times face value. And so it's hurting the artists, it's hurting the fans. And so that's been our real issue. And, we successfully fought it off last session. And one of our big arguments was that, we're the Georgia music industry and that StubHub did not actually even employ a single person in the state of Georgia. Well, to rectify that now, they've invested in an office space because they're that big in Georgia. So we expect that they'll come back again this upcoming legislative session, and so we'll have to be ready for that.
That's what WeWork is for, right?
Yes.
So, David, you testified against that bill, right?
Yeah.
Who else? Why don't you tell us a little about your testimony and what the issues you brought out, and who else was there with you?
Well, I've testified on a lot of things. Let me see if I can rack my brain. But the main thing that I'm getting at is that I'm an artist, right? And so essentially it's my tickets that are being sold. I enter into a private contract with a venue, and there's all kinds of things in that contract. The first and most important part, of course, is what I get paid, but the second most important part is what is the ticket price to our fans, right? Because I'm not trying to sell one ticket for the maximum price. Like when you're in a band, you're selling a subscription to your fans, right? So you don't necessarily want them to have to spend all their money necessarily on one ticket to see you once. You want them to come back. You want them to buy your albums, your CDs, and stuff like that. The StubHub model is completely parasitic, right? They have no skin in the game. All they're doing is acquiring tickets, and they may or may not be encouraging people to acquire those tickets illegally or post speculative tickets. There's certainly a lot of those on their platform. and just, suck as much money out of the ecosystem without having any skin in the game. They're not putting any money into the venues. They're not paying the salaries of the people that work in the venue. They're not promoting the shows. They're not paying the artists. They're not paying the staff, right? And they do this by essentially changing the law, which is the opposite of innovation, but sadly, like the 8th season of a sitcom, they do the same thing over and over and over again. They are just doing it by changing the law. There's no innovation there. They're just trying to mandate state by state that when I sell my tickets, I cannot restrict the transferability. I have to allow them to put it on the platform. I think that violates my right to freedom of contract, but that's a tough argument, or it's a tough road to go down as a lawsuit. But we just can't keep rewarding these freeloaders who have no skin in the game. That's the first thing we have to do, is we have to stop that. And that's what's driving up the ticket prices. That's what's driving up the ticketing fees, is the third-party resellers having automatic legislative access to our tickets.
So, Stephen, when I look at this, I look at these resellers in particular, and I think to myself, there is no way that you can really run that business without bots. I just don't see what their business would be without bots. Now, maybe I'm lacking in my knowledge of the depths of the economics here, but I know that there's been some activity at the federal level to try to stop bots on reselling, and particularly on reselling platforms. No one's really enforced that law. What's your view on, and I know that the NITO, I don't know what the connection is between your organization and NITO, but, friends probably, right? They wrote a complaint to the FTC about sort of open and notorious promotion of bot devices and support for resellers recently. And can you say a little bit about this and what your reaction is to what Mala and David were talking about in Georgia?
Let's talk about Georgia first. I mean, I don't remember exactly what was in that bill, but we talked to about 40 state legislators last week, and let's talk about what a bad bill looks like. A bad bill has unlimited transferability for predatory resellers. They will say that you need unlimited transferability because, somebody's babysitter canceled, they're not going to make it to a show. That's not accurate. GAO did a study in 2018 that showed that the large majority of resellers were professional resellers that sell for a living. We have seen bills in states that would have forced primary ticketing providers to open up their systems to secondary providers. There was a bill in California that was absolutely reprehensible, and we killed it. There was a bill requiring venues, and there have been many bills to require venues to share private ticketing data with predatory resellers with platforms like StubHub. There have been bills that allowed speculative or fake tickets to be sold, legalizing them as long as there were small print somewhere on the webpage or in terms and conditions that said that they were speculative and didn't exist. We've seen prohibitions on terms and conditions that would protect consumers, including delayed ticket transfer, so that the consumer doesn't get the ticket until a couple of days or a day before the show, so they can't print it off and sell it. And they've allowed predatory resellers to buy tickets, not use them, and demand a refund after the show. These are the characteristics of bad bills. And we're not just seeing them in Georgia, we're seeing them everywhere. But I'm very proud to say that since a large coalition called Fix the Ticks has engaged at the state level, that not a single one of these has passed. They passed easily from 2010 to 2022. But in 23 and 24, we stopped them. But we need to not think defensively. We need to think offensively. The more encouraging thing is not what we've stopped, it's what we've gotten done. And I know we're going to talk about the Maryland bill, so I'll put that to the side. But in Minnesota, there was a bill very similar to Maryland that passed The most important thing for any ticketing bill that passes that restricts predatory resellers is there has to be enforcement. That's the issue with Bots Act. There was not a budget. There was not any details in the law itself that dictated what the FTC had to do other than the fact that they had to enforce it, and that's the problem. There's a bill in Congress introduced by the same person that was the main patron of the Bots Act that she's trying to get through before the end of the year. It seems unlikely that that will happen. It will marginally fix the Bots Act, and it will certainly put in place some really interesting things. But ultimately, for the FTC to be able to enforce the Bots Act, they need resources. And there has to be a mechanism that basically requires companies that see circumventions of their security measures to report that in a timely manner to the FTC so they can pursue it. Right now, there are none of those structures in place. That's the problem with Bots Act. And that's why you're seeing some states pass their own Bots Act so that their attorney generals are empowered to go after those folks. And I'll just say it's getting bad. He referenced the National Independent Talent Organization letter in September to the FTC. They found at the ticket brokers conference multiple software platforms advertising on their trade show floor that are illegal under the Bots Act. We got to do something.
Yeah, Kevin, why don't you comment on that and tell us about the Maryland bill you were involved
Sure.
with?
Firstly, I quickly want to point out, too, that we do want to see a healthy competitive market for secondary ticketing, but that can be done without these massive markups. So there are companies, and this is more the case in Europe right now, right, where you have a bunch of options. If you want to go resell your ticket because you can't go to the show, you have options. You can take it to Cash or Trade or Twickets, and there's, a different promoter is going to have different preferred partners that they work with, but there's options, right? And there's a competitive market for that's seems to be working. You just don't have the option to resell above face value, and maybe they charge an extra 10-15% for fees or something depending on the specific country, but you can have an environment characterized by healthy competition without this perverse kind of competition that aligns the incentives in ways that ultimately extracts values from communities and just is about vacuuming as much money out away from music fans and passing it off to the investors, which are mostly the same private equity companies that are ruining the rest of the economy. Maryland was a case where things kind of went really well. It started from a frustrating place in that there was another situation where well-intentioned state legislators dealing with much too big portfolios and way too few resources wanted to do something about ticketing, and they looked around at what models were out there and who's been writing white papers about this kind of stuff over the years, and they start from a problematic place that reflected some of the same kinds of things that were happening in the reseller-driven bills in other states, right? And we were able to sit down with them. We put together some testimony with a bunch of other artist organizations as well as A2IM representing independent labels when the Senate Judiciary did their hearing about the ticketing issues back in 2022. And we shared that with Spencer, the staffer in Don Giles' office, who was also talking to friends at the independent venues, just basically doing a good job of being a staffer and taking some time to learn about the issue. And they came to the conclusion that they needed a different approach. So they withdrew that bill and came back the next year with a really good bill. And what that bill did was ban speculative tickets completely. It addressed other aspects of the deceptive sites and things. Basically creating clear rules of the road that apply to every company in the space, right? It initially had attempted to go even further by instituting a cap on resale. So basically saying, if you can't go to the event, you can resell your ticket, but you can only resell it at face value, and making that the law, as many European countries have done. I think that's probably the direction that we'll see this debate moving in the future. We got that element of it through one of two chambers. couldn't get it all the way across the finish line, but we were able to get the rest of the bill intact. And, I think it's the strongest piece of state ticketing legislation we've seen in the nation so far, and has, provided kind of the template that other states can look to as they're starting to wrestle with this issue of how to move a piece of legislation that has the full support of diverse music stakeholders, right? So we had all of the artist organizations, we had labels, major and independent, we had the venues lined up with us, we had the unions lined up with us, we had the nonprofit arts presenters. People don't think about how this impacts, like the grandma trying to buy tickets for her granddaughter is appearing in the Nutcracker at the ballet, and then she Googles it and ends up on a predatory resale site, right? So this is impacting a whole other set of stakeholders that as they've been pulled into this debate, they have really compelling stories to tell about this too. And we were able to get to a positive, tangible result that helps everybody. And it was a real David and Goliath story too. Like, we were just lined up there with 7 or 8 different reseller lobbyists, and we won. I think that ultimately the level of frustration about all of the different kinds of dysfunction in this industry, like, the more people actually take the time to understand this issue, the more the solutions become clear, and the more compelling that coalition consensus set of solutions is going to be. So I'm excited to see what we're able to do in 2025.
Excellent. So, one of the things that happens on certain topics of law in state legislatures is that you come up with a model bill, and that can be anything, right? Not just ticketing. And you have, like, the Uniform Commercial Code, for example, is something of a model bill. You have the Uniform Partnership Act, which is something of a model bill. But what I noticed literally yesterday is that there's an organization called ALEC, which has put together what appears to me to be, at the behest of these resellers, a model bill that would basically incorporate all the bad stuff that we just heard about and none of the good. And then when you're talking, Kevin, about the Maryland bill, it seems like you're kind of suggesting, although you didn't say the words, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like there may be aspects of that bill that could be something of a model bill or a recommended bill or recommended action. Do you think that first of all, is this ALEC bill something that you've had a chance to study, and is that something that would be of concern? And then do you think that there's any traction for putting together kind of a competitive version of that on the artist side that you're on?
I mean, I think
And
the ALEC
Stephen,
bill.
I'd like you to comment on that.
The ALEC bill's
Like Kevin.
garbage.
What's that?
It's just garbage. It's the same thing that StubHub, et cetera, are trying to do in all of the other states. Yeah, I mean, I think it can
This
be.
is just at the federal level, though.
No. This is
a
a
state
model
bill.
state
It's a
bill.
model
For
state
state,
bill,
yeah.
right?
Okay.
Yeah. It basically looks exactly the same. It's the what I think that they're trying to do is take advantage of the existing infrastructure to try and make the crazy thing that they've been trying to do look like there's some consensus or muscle behind it. But like, these are really fringe ideas. The idea that industry practice should be defined and controlled by the worst actors in that industry. That's not a good way to make policy.
So, Stephen, what's your view on that?
I mean,
what's the story on ALEC? What is
ALEC is a conservative-aligned organization. They play an important role in developing legislation on the conservative side of the aisle in states across the country. Everything is about money, and I mean, I know exactly where that bill came from in terms of one of their sponsors. And this shows why we are outnumbered and outspent. How much did StubHub spend fighting us in California?
They spent at least $1 million.
I think they had $1 million.
Yep,
Yeah.
in Georgia. So $2 million in 2 states. It's bigger than my entire budget, right? We didn't know about the ALEC bill until late last night when when Chris and David sent around, and I appreciate them doing it. I mean, it just shows how hard this is going to be. Because at organizations like ALEC, and there's a Democratic version of them as well, like, sponsors have the ability to get in and introduce resolutions and kind of influence kind of the legislation that's pushed, and that's what happened there. We don't have that ability. None of us have the resources to be able to do that. And so as I look at that bill, which should never pass in any state, not for any partisan reason, but because it's, in Kevin's words, garbage, there's a better way. We already have a piece of model legislation. It's the bill that passed Maryland. There's enforcement in there, and we think it's going to get better this year. And that's what we need to be pushing. We have talked to state legislators significantly. I would imagine that StubHub is watching right now, so I'm not even going to say the number because I don't want them to get out ahead of me, right? They're everywhere. They are trying to undermine us. And the only reason they're trying to undermine us is because they're accountable to their investors. And all they want to do is not empower fans. They want to sell as many tickets as possible for as much money as possible and be unregulated.
Yeah, they're also trying to rescue their IPO, which looks like it's kind of on the rocks. So
Yeah, there's going to be some interesting risk factors in that IPO, let me tell you. As someone who's done IPOs, I wouldn't want that job. So we've sort of touched on speculative ticketing a number of times. I don't know if everybody really is clued in on what speculative ticketing actually is. But this is something which happens all over the world. The Brits actually have a leg up on us to a certain extent because of some disclosure laws that they have and also some special rules they have about football tickets. But basically what it is, and I'd like everybody's comments on this, but basically what speculative ticketing is somebody selling something they don't own. It's kind of like a naked short in stock trading, which is by and large illegal. So this would be a situation where the band announces a tour. Just to take the easy case, the band announces a tour. Tickets are not on sale yet. Somebody, from what they found in the UK, frequently with an address in the Ukraine, offers for sale on a platform something that looks legit because it's on a platform that people think are legit. And they don't own the ticket. And they basically promise to get you, there's different versions of the story, but they either give you an actual ticket, which doesn't exist yet, or they'll tell you it's going to be in this section, sort of a geographical location in the venue of where the seat might be. And usually now some gobbledygook in very small print about, well, and if you don't, if we can't get you the ticket, then you'll get some alternative, which usually doesn't involve getting your money back. It usually involves something else, like, we'll get you the next seat or the next gig, or we'll get you, a health club membership or something, right? I mean, not your money back. So this to me seems like it's got that common law ring to it, sort of like cows, and you can't have half a cow, venues that burn down, you can't play the gig, ships with the same name that leave a port at the different, same time. It's the kind of thing that I feel like somebody in law school told me that you can't sell something that you don't own, right? I don't understand why you have to have a new law, to go after people on that. Maybe you do, and I live a sheltered life, but it just seems to me like you should be able to just, send the marshals over and pick them up. Of course, that would involve finding them, right? So having said that, you guys have brought up speculative ticketing a number of times. David, what's your view on this? I mean, is this something you've encountered yourself, or
Yeah,
how
back
does it
in,
all work?
while the Georgia bill was being discussed in the Georgia legislature, it's to sort of demonstrate to them the speculative ticket. I actually bought a speculative ticket. I was looking through my email here to figure out who I bought it for, but I bought, it was for Depeche Mode. I bought the cheapest ticket I could find, but I was calling Mala, who knows the promoter, and I said, are there any tickets on sale? right now? He's like, absolutely not. And I was like, no, nothing's been released. Absolutely not. So I bought a speculative ticket. Now, the interesting thing about the speculative ticket, it said that the seller had until 2 hours before showtime for the show to provide the ticket to me. And what they did was right before that 2 hour hit, they just refunded me my money, right? So if they don't get the ticket, it's like having, in the derivatives world, it's like having a free call, right? If they can get the ticket, they make money off of it. If they can't get the ticket, they just refund you the money like 2 hours before the show. Now, I live in Georgia, so I could have driven to, I didn't have a hotel room. I didn't buy plane flights or anything like that. But this is such an egregious, like, sort of consumer fraud. It boggles my mind that the FTC or the Securities and Exchange, the other SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, doesn't go after this. This is just outright fraud. Further, it seems to be coordinated across a large number of actors, right?
And countries.
Wire fraud, all kinds of things. I don't understand why there hasn't been a RICO across prosecution like for all of the ticket resellers. I mean, we can keep passing civil laws and keep launching civil class actions lawsuits, which I've been a plaintiff on a couple, right, and stuff like that. But the most efficient way to deal with this is put people in fucking jail, okay? That's the way to deal with it. You wouldn't have to have an new FTC panel that's monitoring the ticket resale and stuff like that. Put people in jail, then it stops.
At the state level, I mean, it's, to me, this obviously violates many state property
Sorry about my
laws and
language.
consumer protection laws. So Molly, when we were working on this Georgia bill, did this speculative ticketing issue come up, and was it discussed with the members?
It did, and the legislators really are trying to understand the issue. It gets very complex and complicated, and I think that the other side wants it to be that way, and purposefully, pushes certain arguments that, that ticket is not the license that it actually is. It is their property. And I think to get around our idea of banning the speculative tickets, they wanted to introduce language that says you can ban speculative tickets, but we want to carve out for concierge ticketing process where they would, on behalf of the ticket buyer, purchase a ticket prior to it being sold, which is, again, it's the same thing, but this is where they're innovative, I would say, in a corrupt sort of way. They're trying to rewrite the policy to allow them to keep doing what they're doing and make that legal. And so, a lot of that is what everyone up here has been doing is you've got to educate and inform. And here's what they're saying, but let's step back and really think through why is that any different than what they have already proposed? And why are they coming to our state and proposing how our business is done? This is not, they need to kind of, do what they do, which is supposedly just being the platform. But going back to the speculative ticketing thing, sometimes they don't buy the tickets, but the other question is, how are they, I don't know how often it happens, but how are they able to buy the exact seat that they have promised someone before those tickets went on sale?
Well, I'll actually answer that. I'm actually not sure. I was looking for Vivid Seats in my email. I'm not sure which retailer I bought it from, so just to be clear on that. It was something like that. They give you a section, but they don't give you a seat number. Or I was just looking at some speculative tickets for Camper Van Beethoven. We have a sold-out show at the Fillmore in April, and they give you basically sort of like a fake row
But still.
It's like a general, it's like not actually, so, and it says in the fine print usually on these things that, well, we may not get you this exactly, we'll give you an equivalent seat, right? Now, the weird thing about the Fillmore is that I knew these were speculative tickets because the Fillmore is just general admission. It's just, that's all it is. You just get there early and you get up front, right? So there are no rows, there are no areas, there's no, you know. So anyway, so that's one of the things is that in the fine print, they'll
But
say
they're
that.
also using bots to be able to somehow,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
They have to be using, yeah, I don't see how they, so to that point that you made, Mala, about the concierge service. So Colorado had I thought, a pretty good bill that got passed, but then was vetoed by the governor. And it was one of those kind of like a pocket veto because of timing.
No, it was actually vetoed by the governor.
Yeah, and there was a veto statement, but it was vetoed. But I think they couldn't come back and try to override the veto. I think that's what it
Right.
was.
Well,
Yeah.
The state legislature in Colorado doesn't have the authority to override gubernatorial veto.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, well, there you go. But when I was reading his veto statement, I'm reading along saying, well, how's he going to address speculative ticketing? And I kind of read through it once, and I thought, he didn't say anything about speculative ticketing. And I went back and I read it again, and he said they had an innovative waiting service. And I thought, oh, that's speculative ticketing. That's what he means by that, an innovative waiting service. I'm so gauche. I didn't realize. I thought they were selling something they didn't own. It wasn't that at all. It was an innovative waiting service, right? So, I mean, these people are not stupid, you know. I mean, they come in and they manage to make their case to otherwise, you know, smart people. But, so, Stephen, do you have a point of view about the speculative ticketing? I mean, is this, I know what your point of view is. but
I know
about
we're running
what
out of
to
time. I
do
feel
about
like
it?
I know we're running out of time. I've talked enough. I'll just tell you, it's getting so bad that if you go watch the season finale of Girls Five Eva, it's about speculative ticketing. The #1 movie on Netflix 2 weeks ago was a Hallmark type Christmas movie called Meet Me Next Christmas. And there were 2 instances where someone was sold a speculative or fake ticket in that movie. When it's made it into the mainstream, maybe Congress and state legislatures should think about doing something about it, and maybe the governor of Colorado shouldn't have vetoed that bill.
Yeah.
I think it's important to talk about how they've been able to get away with this and how they've been able to convince people like Governor Polis. And I think part of it requires us to talk directly about Ticketmaster, because their strategy has been to weaponize these consumer groups and weaponize the broad and justified outrage with some of the things that Ticketmaster has been doing, and then prop that up and inject that into policy debates where it's not relevant, right? So they will say that any of the interventions that we come up with to deal with the secondary market somehow help Ticketmaster or reinforce Ticketmaster's monopoly, right? Or they will say, well, Ticketmaster opposes speculative tickets, so speculative tickets must actually be good somehow. No, that's not how things work, right? Every primary ticketing company also opposes speculative tickets because of the corrosive impact that they have on the entire industry. Just because Ticketmaster is right, takes one view doesn't mean that you have to reflexively oppose it. You have to be able to apply a consistent critique of corporate power across the board, right? And so what policymakers need to understand is that you've got the right set of tools for the right problem. The competition problems that follow from one company owning too much of the marketplace, that's addressed by a Department of Justice lawsuit and by states' attorneys general. The need for some clear rules of the road legislatively that protect consumers, that protect fans, that protect artists and protect venues, and that is the legislature's job, right? And these are related problems in that we're addressing 2 parts of the dysfunction that are happening simultaneously, but they're operating on parallel tracks. They don't conflict with each other.
Thank you, everybody. I think we're running tight on time, so I think we're going to call it there, unless there's any closing statements for the good of the order that anybody would like to make. We will call it there. Thank the panel, and thank you all for coming today.